My life changed completely that cold November night when I received the news I had never expected. My Aunt Margaret had died. It wasn't just her sudden death that left me heavy-hearted. It was the unexpected inheritance that fell upon me, a burden I had never imagined carrying. Aunt Margaret was a shadowy figure in our family, living in isolation in her old Victorian mansion in the English countryside, surrounded by mysteries and rumors of a turbulent past. The relationship between us was practically non-existent, marked by brief encounters and superficial conversations during rare family occasions. Her presence always provoked in me a curiosity mixed with an unsettling sense of fear, as if there was something hidden beneath her enigmatic expression. The decision to accept the inheritance didn't come from greed or a desire for adventure. It came from a much deeper and darker place. My father had passed away a few years ago, leaving me with a sense of emptiness and unanswered questions about our family past. I saw this inheritance as a last connection with him, a way to perhaps better understand where we came from and who we really were. In addition, I was facing financial difficulties that consumed my days and nights in an incessant search for stability. The mansion, with all its secrets, seemed to offer a way out, or at least a temporary refuge from the storm that was my life. When I arrived at the mansion, a feeling of unease overtook me. The house, imposing and silent, seemed to watch my every move, its dark corridors full of shadows whispering secrets that I still couldn't understand. The charged atmosphere was almost palpable, filling the air with a heaviness that made it difficult to breathe. It was on the first night, as the wind howled outside, and I tried to find some comfort in the old blankets of the guest bed, that I realized the depth of the mistake I had made in getting involved with Aunt Margaret's inheritance. Unexplained sounds echoed through the house, distant footsteps in empty corridors, and whispers that seemed to call my name. It was as if the mansion itself was alive, awakening with my arrival. That night, I knew that my life would never be the same again. I was about to uncover secrets that were perhaps better left buried, to face truths that would challenge my sanity. But at that moment, all I felt was a deep fear of what was to come, a sense of being pulled into an endless abyss. Aunt Margaret's inheritance wasn't just a house and its belongings. It was a portal to a world of shadows and terrors that I could never have imagined. Over the next few days, driven by a mixture of determination and fear, I decided to explore the mansion and its countless forgotten corners. It was in the attic, among piles of dust-covered objects and old books, that I found my aunt's diary. The yellowed pages contained tales that chilled my blood, stories of nocturnal rituals, dark pacts, and a curse that seemed to run in our family for generations. Every word I read increased my unease, but I couldn't stop. It was as if my aunt's voice, though dead, was whispering to me through those pages, begging me to understand the truth behind our cursed lineage. The nights became a torment. Vivid nightmares plagued me, in which I saw my aunt amid circles of candles, muttering incantations in forgotten languages, her hands raised to the night sky as shadowy figures danced around her. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, not knowing where reality ended and dreams began. It was in the midst of these disturbing dreams that I noticed the locket for the first time. Resting among the belongings left by my aunt, the object seemed to emanate a dim light of its own, calling out to me. According to the diary, the locket was the key to the curse that plagued our family. It had strange symbols engraved on it, the meaning of which I didn't know, but I felt instinctively that it carried a powerful and dangerous energy. Driven by a need for answers, I began to research the medallion, leafing through the old books in the mansion's library, and even some of the oldest diaries I could find. I discovered that it was an artifact used in ancient rituals to establish communication with entities from another dimension. This discovery shed new light on the strange events in the house and the disturbing dreams that had plagued me since my arrival. Each night, the apparitions became clearer and more intense. Shadowy figures wandered the dark corridors, and the figure of my Aunt Margaret, pale as the moon, appeared in reflections and at the foot of my bed, muttering words I couldn't understand. It was clear that she wanted to tell me something crucial about the curse that involved not only her, but our whole family. I was trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up, and the locket seemed to be both the key and the lock to this world of shadows. The feeling of being watched, of not being alone, grew with each day. I knew I needed to find out more, to understand what my aunt was trying to tell me, what she had discovered. But every step I took towards the truth seemed to drag me deeper into a bottomless abyss, a place where the shadows whispered my name. In an act of desperation or perhaps madness, I decided to perform one of the rituals described in my aunt's diary, in the hope of making contact with her and understanding what needed to be done to end this chain of horrors. I set up the scene in the living room, with the medallion in the center, surrounded by candles and symbols drawn on the floor, exactly as described in the instructions that trembled in my hands. As I began to recite the ancient words, the air around me became heavy and a cold breeze swept through the room, blowing out the candles one by one. It was then that I realized my terrible mistake. Instead of making contact with my aunt, I had opened a portal to something much darker. The shadows in the room stirred, and a sense of pure terror enveloped me as indistinct figures began to emerge from nowhere, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. I ran down the corridor, trying to escape, but the doors closed in front of me as if the house itself was fighting to keep me in. The mansion was alive, pulsing with dark energy, and I had underestimated the power these ancient rituals possessed. With a lot of effort and a dose of luck I didn't know I possessed, I managed to close the portal, but the damage had already been done. The paranormal activity in the house not only continued, but intensified. Objects moved of their own accord. Whispers and screams filled the night, and the apparitions became more aggressive, leaving physical marks in their fury. It was during one of these nights, while I was hiding in what I believed to be the only safe part of the house, that I discovered a secret passage behind a bookcase in the library. It led me to a network of ancient tunnels under the mansion, and following them, I found a hidden chamber filled with ancient inscriptions on the walls and an altar in the center. The inscriptions spoke of the curse and offered a clue as to how to break it. But the solution required a sacrifice, a price that left me hesitant and terrified. In that chamber, my aunt's presence had never been so strong, as if she were by my side, watching my every move. My hands trembled as I read and reread the inscriptions, trying to find another way out, a way to avoid the inevitable. But the truth was clear. To break the curse, a sacrifice would have to be made, and I feared that sacrifice would have to be mine. At this point in the story, I no longer knew whether I was fighting to save myself or to save my aunt's soul, trapped in a cycle of eternal torment. All I knew was that the mansion had become a battleground between the world of the living and the realm of the shadows, and I was at the center of it, fighting a war I wasn't sure I could win. After that night in the secret chamber, something in me changed. A grim determination took hold of me, a resolve to face whatever came, whatever the cost. With each passing day, the mansion seemed to become more aggressive, as if it sensed my intention to break the curse that bound it. Objects flew violently through the air, mirrors shattered with no one around, and the shadows, they seemed to follow me, whispering threats that only I could hear. Determined to find a solution, I delved even deeper into the mysteries of those tunnels and the ritualistic chamber. The inscriptions on the walls, written in a long-forgotten language, spoke of an ancient conflict, a battle between light and shadow, and of a sacrifice needed to restore the balance. I needed more information, but every answer I found only led to more questions. It was then, in a stroke of luck, or perhaps bad luck, that I stumbled upon a book hidden inside a niche in the chamber. The book contained details of a purification ritual, but the price to pay was high. One particularly stormy night, when the mansion seemed to vibrate with a sinister energy, I decided to act. Preparing the ritual as described in the book, I used my own blood as part of the spell, in the hope that my personal sacrifice would be enough to placate the forces ravaging the house. The candles around the ritual circle I had burned with my blood trembled in the wind that came out of nowhere, and the shadows around me stirred with anticipation. The ritual, however, didn't go as planned. Instead of calming the spirits, it seemed to enrage them even more. I was attacked by an invisible force, which threw me against the walls of the chamber, leaving me with wounds that would scar my body and soul. As I lay on the floor, sore and exhausted, I began to question my sanity. Was there really any way to end this curse? Or was I destined to be yet another victim of the mansion? Recovering from the attack, I realized that the only way to face the darkness was with light. I needed to complete the ritual, not just with my blood, but with my soul. It was a decision that could cost me my life, but at that moment, I was ready to face whatever was necessary. Armed with ancestral knowledge and iron determination, I prepared for the last stage of the ritual, not knowing if I would see the dawn. At this point in my journey, I was no longer the same man who had entered that mansion. I had been marked by darkness, transformed by it, but I was still fighting to bring light back to that cursed place. The fight that followed would be the hardest of my life, a battle not only against the forces of darkness, but against the demons within me. In the heart of darkness, in that moment of absolute despair, I made the choice that would change everything. With what little strength I had left, I completed the purification ritual, sacrificing not just my blood, but a part of my essence, my soul, in the hope that this would be enough to break the curse that had plagued the mansion and my family for generations. The atmosphere around me intensified, becoming almost unbearable, as I recited the last words of the incantation. When the ritual was completed, a burst of light flooded the chamber, casting out the shadows and bringing a brief moment of silence. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything ceased. The mansion was quiet, as if breathing a sigh of relief for the first time in centuries. But the cost of that peace was high. I felt emptied. Part of me lost in that act of sacrifice. In the days that followed, the mansion did indeed seem purified. The apparitions stopped, the nocturnal whispers disappeared, and the oppressive feeling of being watched had dissipated. But I knew that the price of my victory was eternal imprisonment. The curse was broken, but at a terrible cost. I was now bound to the mansion, a part of the fabric of its existence. I had hoped to find peace at the end of this journey, but instead I found a new kind of torment. I was trapped, unable to leave the estate, condemned to live out my days in the shadow of what I had fought so desperately to destroy. The mansion, although free of the curse that plagued it, became my prison, a constant reminder of the sacrifice I had made. Reflecting on the events, I realized that the battle against darkness was more complex than I had imagined. It wasn't just about rituals and sacrifices. It was a fight against destiny itself, against the curse that ran in my blood. I had underestimated the power of these ancient forces, and now I was paying the price for my arrogance. So my days passed in a haze of memories and regrets, every corner of the mansion a reminder of the choices I had made. But even in this bleak existence, I held on to the hope that somehow my story would serve as a warning to others, that my sacrifice would not be in vain, and that the darkness, once brought to light, would lose its power. At this point in the narrative, the line between heroism and madness becomes blurred, a reflection of the human cost that these battles against the supernatural often demand. The mansion, now a place of superficial calm, hides in its foundations the story of an eternal struggle between light and shadow, a battle that, in many ways, was not yet over. In the quiet that followed the storm, I began to perceive nuances of the mansion that had previously escaped me. The days unfolded in a silent exploration, a search not for more hidden secrets, but for an understanding of the legacy I had inherited, and of which I was now an inseparable part. My discoveries led me to hidden passages and long-forgotten sealed rooms, each holding fragments of my family's history and the curse that weighed on it. In one of these sealed rooms, I found relics and artifacts whose origins were lost in time, each object telling a story of power, doom, and sometimes redemption. They were pieces of a complex puzzle, tracing my family's lineage through centuries of dark bargains and struggles against unimaginable forces. I began to understand the magnitude of the curse that plagued us. It wasn't just a shadow over our house, but a burden carried by my ancestors, an inheritance of blood and shadows. Driven by a mixture of duty and desperation, I began experimenting with the artifacts, trying to use their ancient power to free the souls trapped inside the mansion, including, I hoped, that of my Aunt Margaret. But with each attempt, the paranormal activity only seemed to intensify, as if instead of freeing the souls, I was chaining them even more tightly to the place. It was then that, through an ancient mirror found in one of the locked rooms, I managed to establish a tenuous communication with the imprisoned souls. Their voices, although distorted and full of suffering, began to tell their own stories, revealing the truth about the curse that not only imprisoned their souls, but also fed the darkness that permeated the mansion. I learned about the ancestor who had started it all, betrayed and consumed by a desire for revenge that transcended death. Equipped with this new knowledge, I realized that in order to free the souls and perhaps myself, I needed to confront the source of the curse. This meant delving even deeper into the shadows of the mansion and my own family, uncovering the legacy of pain and betrayal that had started this spiral of misfortune. The answers to liberation, I now understood, were intertwined with the darker motives that had given rise to the curse. In the process, I was not only confronting the ghosts of the past, but also the darkest truths about myself and the nature of the power I had sought to control. Each step forward revealed more of the chasm that separated the light from the dark, a chasm that I was now walking on a tightrope, balancing between the hope of redemption and the risk of being consumed by the shadow. In my tireless search for answers, I discovered an old book of spells forgotten in a dusty library drawer. The pages, yellowed by time, contained instructions for a ritual that promised not only more direct communication with the trapped souls, but also the key to unlocking the origin of the curse that afflicted our family. It was a faint hope, but I was willing to follow any lead that could free the mansion and myself from this spectral prison. Armed with the knowledge from the book, I prepared the ritual in the main hall, the heart of the mansion, where I felt the presence of the other world most strongly. As the candles illuminated the ancient symbols traced on the floor, a connection formed, stronger and clearer than anything I had experienced so far. The voices of the trapped souls echoed through the space, each narrating their own tragedy, intertwined by the curse that bound us. It was an overwhelming experience, a cacophony of despair and regret that left me at the limit of my mental endurance. Among these voices, my Aunt Margaret stood out, more poignant and desperate, guiding me through the mists of time to the ancestor who had started the curse. Her words revealed a story of betrayal and revenge that surpassed anything I could have imagined. A cycle of pain that had been perpetuated for generations. With each secret revealed, I realized how thin the line between victim and tormentor was, and how my very existence was rooted in this legacy of darkness. Confronting the entity responsible for our curse took more than courage. It required me to plunge into the depths of my soul, facing the darkest aspects of my being. The mansion, with its dark corridors and hidden secrets, became the stage for this final confrontation, where the boundaries between past and present, real and supernatural, began to blur. The clash was both physical and spiritual, a test of the limits of my sanity. The entities I fought were not just manifestations of the curse, but reflections of the open wounds in my own family, wounds that I carried inside me. Every blow I struck was a step towards understanding, every word I spoke a link to untying the knots that bound us to this cycle of suffering. In those moments, facing the shadows that surrounded me, I understood the true nature of the legacy my aunt had left me. It wasn't an inheritance of material goods, but a call to end a cycle of pain that had dragged on for centuries. The struggle, although solitary, was not just mine. It was the struggle of my entire family. An attempt to find peace not only for those who had passed, but for those who were yet to come. After an arduous confrontation with the shadows that plagued the mansion, an unexpected calm settled in, like the silence that follows a storm. I had somehow managed to subdue the entity responsible for the curse that afflicted my family, but the victory came with the painful realization that the mansion and I were now eternally intertwined. The curse, although contained, remained part of the essence of the house, a grim reminder of the battles fought in its halls. In the aftermath of the fight, as I walked through the silent corridors, I found an ancient spellbook hidden in a secret room, the pages of which seemed to contain the key to permanently sealing the curse within the mansion. The instructions were clear, but required a final sacrifice. A part of my own essence had to be offered to strengthen the seal that would confine the curse and prevent it from spreading beyond the mansion's walls. Armed with ancestral knowledge and a sense of duty that transcended my own desire for freedom, I prepared the sealing ritual. The shadows, as if sensing the imminence of their eternal imprisonment, stirred in a last-ditch attempt to escape. But I was determined. As I completed the ritual, I felt a part of me fade, a light that was extinguished in the sacrifice necessary to protect the outside world from the darkness that now lay within. The mansion, purified of the evil influence that dominated it, became a silent sanctuary, a beacon of light surrounded by shadows. I, however, remained trapped, an eternal guardian condemned to watch over the darkness I had helped to seal. The days became indistinct, marked only by subtle changes in the light filtering through the dusty windows. Over time, loneliness and the weight of my new existence began to weigh on me. The mansion, despite its apparent tranquility, was a constant reminder of the battles fought and the losses suffered. I often found myself wandering the corridors, touching the objects that once belonged to my family, each one carrying echoes of memories long since faded. In this limbo, I discovered that the mansion was not only a prison, but also a bridge between worlds, a place where the boundaries between the past and the present, the visible and the invisible, became porous. I began to notice signs, small changes in the environment that indicated the presence of something else, a connection with the realm beyond the veil. This new perception opened doors to deeper understandings, revelations about the nature of the curse and the web of destiny that had entwined my family and the mansion over the centuries. Each discovery was a piece of the puzzle, a step towards a greater understanding, perhaps, of the very essence of life and death. Over the years, the mansion and I became a local legend, a tale whispered on stormy nights and a warning to the brave or foolish who dared to approach. The house, once a symbol of terror, now rested in ghostly stillness, a relic of the past that few had the courage to explore. I, its sole inhabitant, became nothing more than a spectre, a solitary guardian trapped in the shadows between life and death. In this ethereal existence, I learned to observe the world in a way I never thought possible. The seasons changed, the leaves fell and bloomed again, and I remained, an unchanging constant, tied to the mansion and the land that surrounded it. My presence, although invisible to mortal eyes, was sometimes felt by those sensitive to the supernatural. A whisper in the wind or an inexplicable shiver. Over time, my isolation was interrupted by human curiosity. A group of young people, armed with cameras and recording equipment, decided to break into the mansion on a particularly dark night, defying the rumors and seeking their own encounter with the afterlife. I watched them, a mixture of amusement and melancholy filling my being. They were looking for ghosts, unaware that the real ghost was watching them, pondering whether to reveal itself. So, I decided to make my presence known, a decision I didn't take lightly. Through whispers on the recorders and shadows captured by the camera lenses, I told them my story, the true story of the mansion and the curse that had consumed it. My voice, although distant and ethereal, carried the weight of centuries of suffering and the hope that, by sharing my story, I might somehow find redemption, not just for myself, but for all the souls who had been imprisoned by the curse. Their reaction was one of terror and fascination, a mixture I had expected. As they ran through the dark corridors, I felt a pang of sadness, knowing that although my story would be heard, it would be just another legend, distorted and embellished as it was passed on. And so the night ended with them fleeing the mansion, leaving me once again in the company of the shadows and echoes of the past. At that moment, a new realization hit me. My existence, although solitary, had become a bridge between the past and the present, a reminder that some stories, however dark, need to be told. I was in that vast and unchanging flow of time, a guardian not only of the mansion, but of the memories and truths it contained. After the visit of those young adventurers, the mansion and I fell back into oblivion, a footnote in the local horror stories. But something inside me had changed. I felt a strange kind of peace, as if by sharing my story, some of the weight I was carrying had been lifted. Perhaps, I thought, my existence had a purpose beyond simply being the guardian of a cursed place. On a particularly cold and silent night, when the cloak of oblivion seemed to envelop the mansion once again, I felt an unwelcome presence. It was a familiar sensation, an echo of the past that I believed I had left behind. The curse, although sealed, still had its claws embedded in the heart of the mansion, and I knew that my fight might never be completely over. It was then that a new opportunity for confrontation presented itself. Another group, different from the first, entered the mansion, not driven by curiosity, but by a kind of challenge, a test of courage. They weren't looking for ghosts or legends, they just wanted to test their own limits. Watching them, I decided that this would be my chance to end my own cycle of isolation and curse. Using the shadows and echoes of the mansion, I tried to drive them away, but the more I tried, the more they seemed determined to stay. It was in this clash of wills that I realized my story, and that of the mansion, needed a new chapter, one that might finally bring some meaning to my tormented existence. That night, instead of simply trying to scare them, I led them through the mansion, revealing to them not only the horrors it contained, but also the stories of life, love, and inevitably loss that had unfolded in its corridors. My intention was to show that even in the darkest places there is light, and that redemption can be found even in the depths of despair. As dawn approached and they finally left the mansion, something in me felt lighter. Perhaps my story, by being shared again, had taken on a new meaning, transforming from a cautionary tale into a narrative of hope. The mansion remains unchanged under the moonlight, a relic of a forgotten time. I, its eternal guardian, am still here, caught between the past and the present, between life and something that isn't quite death. But now I see my existence differently, no longer as a curse, but as a chance to protect, to tell stories that would otherwise be lost in time, to be the living memory of a place that, despite its dark history, is part of me. And so, while the mansion rests, silent and majestic, under the starry sky, I remain, a ghost within its walls, waiting for the day when my own soul can find the peace I have so long sought. Until then, I watch, I remember, and above all, I tell the story of the cursed inheritance my aunt left me,